My name is Klaus Richter, Captain Lieutenant of the Kriegsmarine. I served under Admiral Karl Nitz during the height of the U-boat campaign in 1942. By then, we believed we controlled the Atlantic. Every week, radio messages reported tonnage sunk, Allied convoys shattered, merchant ships burning. The U-boat arm was Germany's pride, our wolves of the sea. But soon, something began to change. At first, it was only whispers. A few U-boats failed to report in, U-122, U-503, U-656, experienced crews lost without trace. We assumed depth charges or bad weather. Then, more went missing. Boats vanished in calm seas at night with no SOS transmitted. Entire crews gone into the Black Atlantic. In the mess halls of Lorient and Street, Nazaire, the tension grew. Commanders returned from patrol pale and exhausted. They told stories of being spotted in the middle of the night by aircraft that appeared out of nowhere, bombers that dropped flares directly above them, as if guided by some invisible hand. I remember one evening vividly, sitting in the officers' quarters at the Karaman base. The air smelled of diesel and salt. Commander Otto Meyer, who had just returned from patrol, was staring into his coffee cup. "They see us now," he said quietly, even in the dark. We surfaced to charge batteries, and minutes later they're on us. Admiral Nitz ordered an investigation. The first theory was betrayal. Perhaps our Enigma codes had been cracked. Others blamed improved Allied reconnaissance or spies along the French coast, but none of it explained the pattern. Boats sank in the middle of nowhere, far from land, far from eyes. I still remember the telegram that arrived in April 1942. U-500 to missing, presumed lost with all hands. She had been commanded by Captain Lieutenant Jürgen von Rosenstiel, a man I admired deeply. His last transmission had been routine. Calm seas, no enemy contact. Then silence, forever. Something new was happening in the Atlantic. Something unseen. Something the enemy wasn't talking about. And for the first time since the war began, I felt a chill of fear I couldn't explain. The mystery of the disappearing U-boats consumed the higher command. Reports from Admiral Nitz headquarters at Carnival piled out boats gone without a trace. Their last known positions marked by empty seas. Then, in the spring of 1942, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. North Africa. A German signals intelligence team attached to Rommel's Africa Corps had overrun a small British airfield near Tobruk. Among the wreckage of shot-down aircraft, they found something unusual: metal boxes filled with wires, a cathode ray tube, and a strange rotating antenna. The equipment was carefully labeled a SVMK air-to-surface vessel radar. It was crated and flown to Berlin, where naval and Luftwaffe engineers began to examine it. When word reached the Kriegsmarine, Admiral Erhard Mertens, Chief of Naval Communications, personally ordered a technical assessment. He summoned several officers, including myself, to the Kummersdorf testing facility, south of Berlin. We arrived in early May, the air heavy with the smell of oil and ozone from the laboratories. Inside one of the testing halls, the captured radar sat disassembled on a wooden table. Engineers in gray coats pointed to the magnetron tubes and the oscilloscope display. "This," one of them said, "tapping the screen is how they find you." At first, I didn't understand. Radar had always been an abstract concept to us, something used for detecting aircraft or ships at long distances. But this machine, we were told, was small enough to fit inside a patrol plane. It could scan the sea surface and detect the faint reflection of a submarine's conning tower miles away, even at night. The room fell silent. I could hear only the hum of the generator powering the demonstration. A faint green line moved across the radar screen. Suddenly, a small spike appeared. The engineer smiled grimly. "That," he said, "is your submarine." For the first time, we understood what we were facing. The Allies weren't just getting lucky, they were seeing us through darkness and cloud, through night and fog. Their aircraft hunted us like ghosts, guided by invisible eyes. That night, I sat in my quarters staring at my reflection in the window, thinking of the Atlantic. How many of our comrades had died, never knowing why they were found? And how many more would follow before we could find a way to fight something we couldn't even see? When the news of the captured radar spread through command, disbelief followed. Some of the older officers refused to accept it. Impossible, said Admiral Mertens, pacing in his office in Berlin. A machine that sees through night and weather. English propaganda. But the demonstrations at Kummersdorf left little room for doubt. The Allied airmen had found a way to make the invisible visible. Still, in the Kriegsmarine, pride and tradition ran deep. Many refused to believe that the vaunted U-Bootwaffe, Germany's sharpest weapon, could be undone by a few boxes of electronics. Some officers insisted the real cause was espionage, or that the Allies had discovered a way to intercept our Enigma signals. Admiral Karl Nitz, the Ludersee, tried to calm the panic. He said to us, "Gentlemen, no machine replaces seamanship and courage. Our discipline and tactics will prevail." His voice was steady, his posture unshaken, but behind his eyes I saw uncertainty. In Lorient, the atmosphere grew heavy. Every day, more black flags were raised above the submarine pens, each representing a lost boat. I attended memorials so often that the prayers blurred together. Mothers wrote to us, asking about their sons' wives sent letters that would never be read. Inside my own U-boat, U-317, the crew whispered about radar. Herr Kalun, one of my machinists, Ernst Voss, asked me one night, "Is it true the English can see us from the sky even in darkness?" I told him no. I lie. But I wasn't sure anymore. By the summer of 1942, the command ordered us to begin night patrols submerged as much as possible. The irony was bitter. We had once ruled the night, and now we hid from it. The men felt it. The ocean that had once given us power now felt like a trap. Rumors spread fast. Some said the radar could hear us breathing underwater. Others claimed the Allies had trained birds to spot periscopes. Sailors joked to hide their fear, but when we surfaced to charge batteries, every man's eyes scanned the sky. We all knew something had changed. The sea, once silent and vast, now felt watched out by late summer of 1942. The growing panic among U-boat crews forced Berlin to act. If the enemy truly possessed an invisible weapon that could detect us, then we needed something to detect them. The call went out to the Reich scientists and engineers, find a countermeasure. Weeks later, word arrived that a new device was ready for testing, a small, box-shaped receiver developed by a French company under German supervision in occupied Paris. Its name was Metox R600. The engineers claimed it could pick up the radar signals transmitted by British patrol planes before the planes came close enough to spot the submarine visually. I was summoned to Brest to attend a demonstration aboard U-69. The atmosphere on the dock was tense but hopeful. We crowded around the Metox receiver, a crude wooden box with a few dials, wires, and a strange rotating cross-shaped antenna. When the device was powered on, a faint, rhythmic clicking filled the control room. That, the technician explained, is the pulse of the enemy's radar. As the clicks grew faster, he pointed to the sky. Moments later, a British Wellington bomber appeared far on the horizon, exactly as predicted. For the first time in months, the officers smiled. We had a chance. Nitz himself approved the device for mass production. Within weeks, every U-boat leaving port was equipped with Metox. It became our guardian, a sound in the dark that told us when death was near. Back aboard U-317, my crew treated it like a sacred instrument. We even nicknamed it Der Engel, the angel. Whenever the Metox began its slow ticking, we would dive immediately. The first few patrols were nerve-wracking, but each time we avoided detection. Confidence returned to the men. One evening, while crossing the Bay of Biscay, the Metox began to pulse faster than I had ever heard before. We crash-dived just as the faint hum of aircraft engines passed overhead. The depth charges never came. When we surfaced hours later, the sea was empty and calm. That night, the men celebrated in whispers. "Metox saved us," Voss said, tapping the receiver gently as if thanking it. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to hope, but that hope was short-lived. Rumors began again, of boats disappearing even with Metox aboard. Some said the device itself might be betraying our position, that the Allies could somehow track the signals it emitted. The truth, as always in war, was hidden beneath layers of rumor and fear. At the time, though, I didn't care. For a few months, at least, the Metox gave us the illusion of safety, and illusions during that endless Atlantic war were often all a man had left. By the winter of 1942, me-talks had become as common aboard U-boats as the Enigma machine itself. Every crew trusted it with their lives. The rhythmic ticking was our heartbeat in the dark, steady, familiar, sometimes terrifying. It meant the difference between life and annihilation. Our patrols resumed, though more cautiously. The orders from Admiral Knit's headquarters in Lorient were clear. Surface only at night. Charge batteries quickly, dive at the first sign of radar detection. For a time, it worked. Reports showed fewer losses. The men joked again, the fear seemed to fade. But beneath the laughter, I sensed unease. The sea had changed. It no longer belonged to us. During one patrol, deep in the North Atlantic, we received a distress call from U-409, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Friedrich Hasser. His me-talks had begun clicking wildly, but before they could dive, an aircraft appeared and dropped flares directly overhead. Minutes later, the radio went silent. The next day, oil slicks were found drifting across the waves. The illusion of safety was cracking. I remember the moment it hit me, the understanding that we were being hunted by something beyond our grasp. One night, while we drifted silently beneath the surface, I went to the radio room where Oberfunkmitteln sat listening to faint signals through his headset. The me-talks was quiet. No radar, he said softly, but I hear something else. Static. It moves. He handed me the headphones. Through the crackling hiss, I could hear a strange pulse, faint but rhythmic. Unlike the older British signals we'd learned to recognize, it was new. Something different. Something smaller, sharper. I reported it when we returned to base, but the technicians dismissed it as interference. Weeks later, similar reports came from other U-boats, and every one of those boats was lost within a month. Back at St. Nazaire, Admiral Mertens himself inspected several of us returning from patrol. He was calm, polite, but I could see the concern etched on his face. "We are working on improvements," he said. "A new receiver, perhaps, but you must continue your missions. The FIR expects it." The men followed orders, of course. We always did. But the ocean had grown silent, unnaturally silent. Ships that once crossed our periscopes in abundance now moved farther and faster, guarded by air cover we could not see. It was as if the Atlantic itself had turned against us. One evening, standing on the bridge as we cut through a storm, I watched the waves break into pale foam under the moonlight. I thought of the faces of the men who had gone before me, the captains whose boats now lay twisted and broken beneath these same waters. The sea kept its secrets well, and I began to understand that the greatest enemy in this war was not the Allies' guns or depth charges. It was the silence between those faint radar pulses. The silence before death. By the spring of 1943, our confidence in the me-talks detector had begun to waver. The British bombers were finding us again, and with terrifying precision. Boats that had once slipped unseen beneath the waves were now ambushed even before surfacing. Something had changed, but no one could explain what. I was stationed at Kiel when the order came to attend a confidential briefing. A few officers and radio specialists were summoned to a dimly lit hall in the Kriegsmarine research facility. There, we met Admiral Karl Knitz, his uniform immaculate, his eyes sharp but weary. He wasted no time with the introductions. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing through the cold room, "our U-boats are being hunted more effectively than ever before. The British are not guessing. They know where we are, and now we have reason to believe," he paused, looking toward a covered table, "that they know because of this." A technician pulled the cloth away, revealing a battered me-talks receiver, one recovered from a sunken U-boat. The Admiral's hand brushed the device as if it were a corpse. This device, once our guardian, may have become our betrayer. The word sank into us like lead. A signal engineer named Dr. Reinhardt stepped forward. He explained that British intelligence might have learned the frequencies our me-talks used. The device emitted a small but distinct signal, one the Allied aircraft could detect from afar. In essence, every time we turned it on, it broadcast our position to the enemy. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Captain Lieutenant Vogel, a veteran commander, slammed his fist on the table. "Impossible. It has saved hundreds of lives, Dr. Reinhardt nodded solemnly, "Yes, until they learned to listen back." That night, I couldn't sleep. The idea haunted me, that every faint click we had trusted in the darkness had been a whisper to the enemy saying, "We are here." The device that had given us hope might have been calling our killers. The next morning, new orders were issued. All METOX receivers were to be dismantled and destroyed immediately. Crews were instructed to rely solely on visual lookouts and standard radio silence. It felt like tearing away our only lifeline. I watched as our radio operator, Lenz, placed the dismantled METOX pieces into a crate. "So now we're blind again," he muttered. I nodded, but there was nothing else to say. Soon after, we returned to sea without our guardian. The ocean felt emptier than ever before. No clicks, no warnings, just the hum of the engines and the endless black of the Atlantic night. For a few weeks, things seemed quiet. Too quiet. But deep down, every man aboard knew the British hadn't lost us. They were simply waiting for us to surface again. And when they did, the sea would once again come alive with the sound of thunder. By June 1943, the Atlantic had become a graveyard. Every week, we received fewer transmissions from boats that had left alongside us. Some vanished entirely. No distress signals, no survivors. Only their last known coordinates marked with a small black cross on the map and keel. When I returned to port after a long patrol, the mood among the U-boat crews was unlike anything I had seen before. There was no laughter, no boasting of victories. Just silence. Men sat on crates by the docks, smoking without speaking, staring at the sea as if it had betrayed them. One evening, I was summoned to the intelligence office. Oberleutnant Richter, a signals analyst, was there waiting with a pile of British documents spread across the desk. He gestured for me to sit. "Lieutenant Bauer," he said quietly, "you've been working with our radar specialists. You should see this." He handed me a photo. Grainy, but clear enough. A British aircraft equipped with a strange, compact radar antenna under its nose. "This," he said, tapping the photo, "is the ASV Mark E radar. They're using it to find U-boats at night, even when we're submerged at periscope depth." My stomach sank. So it wasn't just the METOX. The British had leapt ahead in technology. They could now see us, not just hear or guess. Richter leaned closer, lowering his voice. "They say this radar operates on a shorter wavelength, around 10 centimeters. That's why METOX couldn't detect it. It's invisible to our systems." Invisible. That word hung in the air like fog. I left the office in a daze. Outside, the dock lights flickered on the black water, illuminating the hulls of half-repaired submarines, survivors of missions that should have been their last. A crewman passed by and muttered, "They're gods now, those British they see in the dark." That night, I met with my old friend Lenz, the radio operator. We sat by the water, drinking from a shared flask, the cold wind biting our faces. "So," he said with a bitter laugh, "we built the best submarines in the world, only for the enemy to build eyes that can see through the sea." I didn't reply. I didn't have to. 2 days later, we set out again. Our orders were to test a new Naxos radar detector, supposedly designed to pick up the shorter wavelengths. But it wasn't ready, and everyone knew it. Still, orders were orders. Before we left, Admiral Nitz himself visited the docks. He moved among the crews, shaking hands, his face pale and grim. When he reached us, he simply said, "The ocean has always been our ally. Don't let fear turn it into your enemy." Then we descended into the steel coffin once more, the hatch sealed above us. As the engines rumbled to life, I stood by the periscope, staring at the faint lights of the harbor fading behind us. I couldn't help but think how many men had watched that same view and never returned. We were no longer hunters. We were ghosts chasing our own shadows beneath an ocean that no longer kept our secrets. The last patrol began in September 1943. Under a sky that seemed endlessly gray. Our U-boat, U-512, was worn down by months of service. The crew was thinner, quieter. Every man carried the weight of loss. We'd stopped asking who hadn't come back. The empty bunks at base spoke loudly enough. Our orders were to patrol the Bay of Biscay, to test the new Naxos radar detector under real combat conditions. It was our supposed answer to the British Death Eyes, the shortwave radar that had made the Atlantic their domain. But we all knew it was too little, too late. The Naxos device was fragile and untested. Its operator, young Funker Weiss, spent hours hunched over it, adjusting dial dials and antennas, trying to coax meaning from the static. Sometimes it chirped faintly, a whisper of warning. Other times it stayed dead silent until the sky exploded. On the fourth night it happened. At 23:14, Weiss shouted from the console, "Contact! Radar emissions, strong and close." Before the captain could respond, the lookout screamed, "Flare! Port side!" The night turned to daylight as magnesium fire rained from above. "Crash dive!" the captain bellowed. The engines roared, the hull groaned, and the sea swallowed us whole. Depth 30 meters, 50, 70. Then, thunder. Depth charges tore the water apart, smashing us against our own steel walls. The lights flickered, gauges shattered, pipes burst like veins. I remember the sound of metal twisting, like the ocean itself was trying to crush us in its fists. When it finally stopped, there was only the sound of water dripping and men breathing in the dark. Somehow, the boat held. The captain ordered silence, hoping the destroyers above had lost us. But they hadn't. Hours later, a second barrage came, precise, merciless. Something ruptured near the stern. The engineers screamed that the ballast tanks were flooding. We were sinking slowly but steadily. The captain made the only choice he could. "Surface," he said quietly. "Well, fight until they finish it." We surfaced into chaos. The sea was on fire, burning oil, wreckage, and light from circling aircraft. Tracers tore through the night as the machine gunners opened fire in defiance, their faces lit by the muzzle flashes. Then a direct hit struck the conning tower. The explosion threw me against the bulkhead. For a moment, everything went white. When I came to, the deck was at an angle. The sea rushed in like black smoke. Someone shouted my name. I think it was Lenz, before a wave swallowed him whole. I remember kicking upward, breaking the surface into freezing wind and rain. Our U-boat, our pride, our home, slipped beneath the waves for the last time. I don't know how long I floated before the British corvette found me. A voice shouted in English, "We've got a survivor." Hands pulled me aboard, rough but not unkind. For the first time in years, I breathed air that didn't smell of oil or fear. Months later, in a POW camp in Scotland, I learned that Admiral Nitz had ordered the withdrawal of most U-boats from the Atlantic. Too many had been lost. Too many young men gone to the deep. The Naxos worked, they said, but by then it didn't matter. The war had turned and the sea no longer belonged to us. I was one of the few who lived to see it end. When I was released in 1946, I returned to Bavaria. The docks, the uniforms, the signals, all gone. I took work repairing radios, the same kind I once used to hunt in silence. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear a faint pulse of static through the speaker, and for a moment, I'd imagine the old signal of the METOX whispering through the noise. Only this time, it wasn't warning me of death. It was reminding me that I had escaped it.